The Texas sun was beginning its slow descent behind the rolling hills of the hill country, painting the sky in bruises of purple and burnt orange. From the vantage point of the ranch porch, the world seemed perfectly still, perfectly silent, save for the rhythmic creaking of a solitary rocking chair. George Strait sat there with his boots resting on the railing, looking out at the land that he and Norma had loved for 50 years. But the beauty of the sunset offered no comfort tonight, because the chair beside him was empty. The silence was not peaceful. It was heavy. It was a physical weight that pressed against his chest, making every breath a conscious effort. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had held a guitar for decades, the same hands that had roped steers and held his children, but now they felt useless because they could no longer hold her. The peace of the ranch was a lie tonight, because tomorrow he had to go into the city. Tomorrow he had to walk into a world of glass and steel and artificial light to sign papers that would officially close another chapter of his life. He closed his eyes, and for a fleeting second he thought he heard the screen door slam. He thought he heard her laugh, but when he opened them, there was only the wind in the mesquite trees and the dying light of the day. The transition from the dusty, soulful silence of the ranch to the sterile, hermetically sealed environment of downtown Austin was jarring. The headquarters of Vortex Media was a monolith of arrogance, a 60-story needle of glass piercing the blue Texas sky. Inside, the air was filtered and chilled to a temperature that felt unnatural, a stark contrast to the honest heat of the parking lot. George Strait walked through the lobby wearing a black resistal hat that had seen rain and sweat, a crisp white shirt buttoned to the collar, and a black blazer that felt like armor. He did not look like the young executives who scurried around him with wireless earbuds buried in their ears, tapping furiously on tablets. He looked like a mountain that had been transported into a computer server room. He was the king of country, a living legend, but in this lobby he was just an analog man in a digital world, and he felt every minute of his 71 years. The receptionist, a young woman with hair dyed a violent shade of pink, barely looked up from her screen when he approached. She did not see the grief etched into the lines of his face. She only saw an appointment slot. "Mr. Strait, you are expected in the Cloud 9 conference room on the top floor. Mr. Vance is waiting for you." The elevator ride was a silent ascent into the stratosphere. George watched the numbers climb, and with every floor he felt further away from the earth, further away from Norma. He was here because the record label had insisted. They spoke of legacy management, of digital footprints, of asset protection, words that meant nothing to a man who measured legacy in kindness and handshake deals. But they had told him it was necessary to protect Norma's image, so he had come. The doors slid open with a soft chime, revealing a sprawling office space that looked more like a spaceship than a place of business. Walls of white lacquer, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and a low hum of electronic activity that set George's teeth on edge. He was led into a conference room that was all glass and chrome. A long table dominated the center, and at the far end, a massive LED screen covered the entire wall. Tyler Vance entered the room 3 minutes later, bringing with him a gust of expensive cologne and frantic energy. He was 28 years old, wearing a suit that cost more than George's first truck, and a watch that was too big for his wrist. He had the smile of a predator, a smile that didn't reach his eyes, which were constantly darting to the smartphone in his hand. "Mr. Strait, it is an absolute honor," Tyler said, extending a hand that felt soft and damp. "I grew up listening to your music. Well, my parents did anyway. Please sit. Can I get you anything? Espresso, sparkling water, kombucha?" George shook his head slowly, removing his hat and placing it on the glass table. The sound of the felt rim touching the glass was the only organic sound in the room. "I'm just here to sign the papers, son." George set his voice a low rumble that commanded attention without raising a decibel. "Let's get this over with. I have a long drive back." Tyler laughed, a sharp, nervous sound. Of course, we value your time. But George, we have something incredible to show you first. You see, when the label hired Vortex Media to handle the Strait family digital estate, we didn't just want to archive old photos. We wanted to create a movement. We wanted to ensure that Norma's memory isn't just preserved, but that it works for you, that it continues to build the brand. George felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. The word brand, when used in the same sentence as his late wife, made his stomach turn. He narrowed his eyes. Norma wasn't a brand, Tyler. She was my wife. She was a mother. Tyler waved his hand dismissively, walking toward the giant screen. Semantics, George. In the modern world, everything is content and grief. Grief is the most powerful engagement tool there is. People love to cry with their heroes. It makes you relatable. It makes you human. George shifted in his chair, the leather creaking. He wanted to stand up and walk out. He wanted to drive back to the ranch and sit on the porch until the stars came out. But something in Tyler's tone held him there, a sinking feeling that things were about to get much worse. Tyler tapped his tablet and the giant screen flickered to life. A progress bar appeared labeled Project Angel Upload Status 99%. Tyler turned to face George, his eyes gleaming with the excitement of a gold miner who had just struck a vein. We gained access to the cloud backup of Norma's old phone, the one she used right up until the end. We used an AI recovery program to sift through thousands of files. Most of it was mundane, grocery lists, photos of the grandkids. But then we found it, the Holy Grail. George felt his heart hammer against his ribs. He had not looked at that phone since the day she passed. He had left it in her nightstand, charged but silent, a technological relic of the conversations they could no longer have. "What did you find?" George asked, his voice barely a whisper. Tyler grinned and pressed a button. The lights in the conference room dimmed automatically, plunging them into a twilight where only the giant screen provided illumination. On the screen, a video player opened. The thumbnail showed a hospital room. The beeping of monitors was audible through the high-definition surround sound system, and then there she was. Norma. She looked frail. Her hair was thinner than he remembered, and the hospital gown swallowed her small frame. But her eyes were bright, and that smile that had anchored George for half a century, was there. George stopped breathing. He gripped the edge of the table so hard his knuckles turned white. He had never seen this video. He didn't know it existed. On the screen, Norma adjusted the camera, holding it with shaking hands. She looked directly into the lens, which meant she was looking directly at George, now magnified 10 feet tall on a boardroom wall. "Hey, honey." The digital. Norma said, her voice raspy but full of warmth. "If you're seeing this, I guess I'm already gone. I didn't want to make a big fuss, and I know how you hate goodbye videos, but I just needed to say a few things that I might forget when the medicine kicks in." George felt a tear, hot and sudden, trace a path down his cheek. He was paralyzed. It was like seeing a ghost, a beautiful, heartbreaking ghost. But then Tyler paused the video. The image froze on Norma's face. Tyler spun around, clapping his hands together. "Powerful, right? Absolutely gut-wrenching. We've run this through our sentiment analysis algorithms, and it scores off the charts. George, this is viral gold. We're planning to launch this tomorrow at noon. We've already lined up exclusives with the morning shows. We're calling it the Goodbye Letter. We'll link it to a pre-order of your greatest hits collection and a limited edition merchandise line. Portion of proceeds to charity, of course, but the engagement metrics, George. This will make you trending on every platform in the world. It will introduce Norma and your love story to a whole new generation." The silence that followed was terrifying. The young executives in the back of the room who had been taking notes stopped typing. They sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure. George Strait did not move. He stared at the frozen image of his wife, his private agony plastered on a screen for a room full of strangers to analyze. He slowly turned his gaze from the screen to Tyler. The look in George's eyes was not anger. It was something far more dangerous. It was disappointment. It was the look of a man who lived by a code, confronting a man who had none. "You want to sell this?" George asked, his voice steady, but carrying the weight of a coming storm. "You want to take the last words my wife spoke on this earth and use them to sell records?" Tyler blinked, confused by the lack of enthusiasm. "George, you're missing the point. It's a tribute. It's honoring her. And frankly, the label needs a boost this quarter. The country demographic is shifting. We need a hook. Norma is the hook." George stood up. The movement was slow, deliberate. He picked up his hat, but he didn't put it on. He walked around the table, approaching Tyler. The young CEO held his ground, but he took a subtle step back, intimidated by the physical presence of the cowboy. "Give me the phone," George said. Tyler frowned. "What?" The phone, George repeated. The device you took this from, I know you have it here. You needed it for the transfer. Tyler hesitated, glancing at the other executives. Well, yes, technically it's in the secure archive box, but we have the digital master now, so the hardware is irrelevant. We don't need the phone to proceed with the launch. I want the phone, George said, and this time there was no room for negotiation. It wasn't a request, it was an order from a man who had stared down bulls and bad weather and wasn't afraid of a boy in a suit. Tyler sighed, annoyed by the sentimentality. Fine, if it makes you feel better. He gestured to an assistant who hurriedly retrieved a padded envelope from a metal briefcase. She handed it to Tyler, who handed it to George. George opened the envelope and slid the device out. It was an older model iPhone, the screen cracked in the corner from the time Norma dropped it at the grocery store. He remembered that day. He remembered laughing with her about it. He held the phone in his calloused palm, feeling the cold glass. It felt heavy. It felt like a holy relic that had been desecrated. He looked at the screen of the phone, which was currently mirroring the system on the wall. Turn it off, George said, pointing to the big screen. Take her face off that wall. Tyler rolled his eyes. George, please be reasonable. We have a schedule. The press release goes out in an hour. We can't just stop the machine. The algorithm waits for no one. If we miss the optimization window, we lose 30% of the potential impact. You signed a contract granting us rights to manage the digital assets. This video is a digital asset. George looked at Tyler, and for the first time he felt a profound pity for him. You think everything is an asset, son. You think a man's life is just data points. You don't know what love is, do you? You think love is a heart emoji. Tyler stiffened. I'm a professional, Mr. Strait, and I'm telling you this is happening. It's good business. And Norma would have wanted the world to see how much she loved you. Would she? George asked softly. He looked down at the phone in his hand. He pressed the power button. The device hummed to life. He didn't look at the apps or the photos. He went to the file manager where the video was stored. He saw the file name, final message.move. But underneath it, attached to the metadata of the file, was a text note, a feature of the old operating system that allowed users to attach captions or reminders to specific media files. The team at Vortex Media, in their haste to rip the high-definition video and upscale the audio, had completely ignored the metadata. They cared about the pixel count, not the context. George put on his reading glasses, which he pulled from his breast pocket. His hands were shaking slightly, not from age but from rage contained by sheer will. He tapped on the note icon next to the video. The text expanded. It was typed with typos, likely because her fingers were weak, and her vision was blurry in those final days. George read the words. George, my love, I'm recording this for you, just for you. I know how lonely it gets out on the porch when the sun goes down. I want you to watch this when you miss me too much. But please promise me one thing. Don't post this. Don't let the world see me like this. I want them to remember me dancing with you in the kitchen, not dying in this bed. Keep this for us. It's our secret. I love you. The air left the room. George read it again. Don't post this. Keep this for us. He looked up at the giant screen where his wife's face was still frozen, paused in a moment of vulnerability that she had explicitly asked to keep private. He looked at Tyler, who was checking his watch, tapping his foot impatiently. The disconnect was absolute. Here was a man ready to broadcast a sacred prayer to the entire planet for profit, defying the dying wish of the woman who made it. George felt a clarity wash over him. It was the clarity of a man who realizes that the rules of the game are rigged, and the only way to win is to flip the table. He looked at the progress bar on the screen, 99%. The upload was queued. All Tyler had to do was press one button on his laptop, and the video would be sent to servers around the world, copied, mirrored, and cached forever. Once it was out there, it could never be taken back. It would belong to the internet. It would belong to the trolls and the critics and the fans. It would no longer belong to George. You didn't read the note, did you? George asked quietly. Tyler looked up from his watch. What note? The note she attached to the file, George said, tapping the cracked screen of the phone. The instructions she left. Tyler scoffed. Instructions? George, we have the legal rights. Any notes are just... Sentimental context. They aren't binding. We are running a business here. Look, I know you're emotional. It's understandable, but you hired us to do a job. Let us do it. We are making you relevant again. Relevant? George repeated the word, tasting like ash in his mouth. He looked around the room at the glass walls, at the city skyline, at the young faces that viewed him as a product. He realized that they truly didn't understand. They weren't evil in a theatrical sense. They were just empty. They had traded their souls for engagement metrics so long ago that they couldn't recognize a soul when it was standing right in front of them. George took a step closer to the main server rack that hummed in the corner of the room, blinking with blue lights. It was the brain of the operation, the hub connected to Tyler's laptop. "You think you can monetize my grief?" George said, his voice rising slightly, the rumble turning into a growl. "You think you can take the most painful moment of my life and turn it into a hashtag?" Tyler sensed the danger now. He stepped between George and the laptop. "George, sit down. Security is just down the hall. Don't do something you'll regret. The campaign is locked. The sponsors are signed. You can't stop this train." George Strait smiled. It was a sad smile, a smile that said goodbye. He wasn't the king of country in that moment. He was just a cowboy who missed his wife and who would burn the world down to protect her honor. "Watch me," George whispered. He didn't lunge for the laptop. He didn't throw a punch. He did something that confused everyone in the room. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a checkbook. It was an old-fashioned, leather-bound checkbook. He pulled a gold pen from his pocket. He placed the checkbook on the glass table, pushing aside a stack of spreadsheets. "What are you doing?" Tyler asked, his voice cracking. George began to write. The sound of the pen scratching against the paper was loud in the silent room. He wrote a number with many zeros, a number that represented a significant portion of the wealth he had accumulated over 50 years of touring and recording. He signed his name with a flourish. He tore the check out and held it up. "How much is the contract worth?" Tyler, George asked. "How much are you projected to make from this campaign? 2 million? 5? Tyler stared at the check. The number written there was $10 million. His eyes widened. "George, I don't understand. This is the buyout," George said, his voice hard as granite. "This is the penalty for breach of contract. This is me buying back my life." He slammed the check onto the chest of the young CEO. Tyler fumbled to catch it. And now George said, stepping past the stunned executive, "I'm taking what's mine." George reached the laptop connected to the big screen. The upload bar was hovering. Click to publish. His finger hovered over the trackpad. "Don't!" Tyler screamed, lunging forward. "That's the master file. If you delete that, we lose the encryption key for the cloud backup. It's the only copy." George looked at Tyler one last time. His eyes were cold blue steel. "Good," he said. He didn't just close the window. He dragged the file to the trash. He emptied the trash. Then he opened the system settings, found the disk utility, and formatted the external drive that was plugged into the machine. The screen behind him went black. Norma's face disappeared. The silence that returned to the room was absolute. The digital ghost was gone. The viral moment was dead. The millions of potential views vanished into the electronic ether. Tyler stood there holding a $10 million check, staring at a blank screen. His face was pale. You just destroyed the campaign. You destroyed the asset. Do you have any idea what you've done?" George picked up his hat. He placed it on his head, adjusting the brim until it sat just right. He picked up Norma's old phone with the cracked screen and slipped it into his pocket next to his heart. "I kept a promise, son," George said. He turned his back on the millions of dollars on the glass tower, on the modern world that wanted to eat him alive. He walked toward the elevator, the sound of his boots echoing on the polished floor, a rhythm of integrity in a room of static. But the story wasn't over. As George stepped into the elevator, the doors closing on Tyler's horrified face, he knew that men like Tyler didn't give up that easily. The backup might be gone, but the war for privacy had just begun. And as the elevator descended, George felt the vibration of the phone in his pocket. A notification, not from the agency, but a reminder he had set for himself on Norma's phone months ago, a reminder that had just triggered. The screen lit up in his hand. By feed for the horses. Norma was still taking care of him even from beyond, But George knew that as soon as he stepped out of that lobby, the lawyers would be calling. The agency wouldn't let $10 million silence them forever. They had seen the video, they knew the content, and in a world of leaks, knowing is half the battle. George walked out into the heat of the Austin afternoon. He needed to get back to the ranch, he needed to get back to the porch, because tonight he had a video to watch. But he would watch it alone with the sunset and the crickets and the memory of the woman who asked him to keep one last secret. The battle at the agency was won, but the war for his peace was far from over. The heavy door of the Ford F-450 King Ranch slammed shut, sealing George inside the cabin, a fortress of leather and silence that smelled faintly of diesel and cedar. He sat there for a long moment, his hands gripping the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his knuckles white against the dark leather. The air conditioning began to hum, blowing cool air against his face, drying the sheen of sweat that had broken out not from the heat, but from the adrenaline of the confrontation. He looked out the tinted window at the towering glass facade of Vortex Media. From down here on the street level, the building looked like a tombstone, a monument to a world that had forgotten the sound of the wind in the grass. George reached into his pocket and pulled out the cracked iPhone. He set it gently on the passenger seat, as if it were a fragile bird with a broken wing. He didn't turn the radio on. He didn't want to hear the news or the weather or even the music that had made him famous. He just wanted the hum of the engine and the long stretch of asphalt that led back to the only place that made sense. He put the truck in gear and pulled out into the chaotic Austin traffic. The city was a living, breathing organism of steel and hurry. Cars honked, pedestrians stared at their screens, and construction cranes loomed overhead like metal vultures. George navigated the congestion with the muscle memory of a man who had driven millions of miles, but his mind was back in that conference room. He replayed the look on Tyler Vance's face. The shock, the greed, the absolute lack of understanding. George had written a check for $10 million without blinking. It was a staggering amount of money even for him. That was money for the grandkids' trust funds, money for the ranch improvements money that could have done a lot of good. But as he merged onto the highway, leaving the skyline behind, he felt no regret. A man's honor wasn't for sale, and neither was his wife's dignity. If he had to spend every dime he had to keep Norma's memory safe, he would be happy to die broke in a trailer as long as he could look himself in the mirror. Back in the penthouse office of Vortex Media, the atmosphere was toxic. Tyler Vance was pacing the length of the conference room holding the check with trembling fingers. The other executives were silent, terrified to speak. The server rack was still humming, but the screen was black. The prize asset deleted, wiped from existence. Tyler stopped pacing and slammed his hand on the glass table. "He thinks he can just buy us off," he shouted, his voice cracking. "He thinks he can walk in here, destroy our proprietary work, throw money at us like we are hired help and just leave." One of the junior associates, a young woman named Sarah, tentatively raised her hand. "But Tyler, he gave us $10 million. That covers the projected revenue for the next 3 years. We hit our quarterly targets in a single afternoon. Technically, isn't this a win?" Tyler spun on her, his eyes wild. "It's not about the money, Sarah. It's about the narrative. It's about control. George Strait just walked in here and emasculated this entire agency. If word gets out that we let a client delete their own campaign and walk away, we look weak. We look like amateurs. And besides, that video was going to win awards. It was going to put us on the map globally." He stared at the check again. "We cash this, obviously, but we don't let him win the war." Tyler pulled his own phone from his pocket. He opened a gallery app. "Did anyone get it?" he asked, looking around the room. "Did anyone record the meeting?" The room was silent. Then a skinny intern in the back slowly raised his hand. I was recording a voice memo for the minutes, but I had my phone propped up against my water bottle. The camera was on. I think I got the end of it." Tyler snapped his fingers. "Send it to me. Now." The intern tapped his screen. A moment later, Tyler's phone buzzed. He watched the footage. The angle was low and slightly obscured by a coffee mug, but the audio was crystal clear. It captured the moment George slammed the check on the table. It captured the growl in his voice when he said, "I'm taking what's mine." From this angle, without the context of the sentimental note, without seeing Norma's face on the screen, George didn't look like a grieving husband protecting his wife. He looked aggressive. He looked unstable. He looked like an angry old man bullying a room full of young professionals. Tyler smiled a slow, cold smile. Perfect. He looked up at his team. We can't release Norma's video. That's gone. But we can certainly release a statement about the unfortunate breakdown of our professional relationship with Mr. Strait. And if this video were to accidentally leak to a few gossip blogs, well, we can't control the internet, can we? We frame it as a concern for his mental health. The grieving icon losing his grip. We control the spin. Meanwhile, George was 60 miles away, unaware that the knife was being sharpened. The landscape had changed. The skyscrapers had given way to strip malls, and the strip malls had given way to open pastures. The sun was lower now, casting long shadows across the highway. He felt the tension in his shoulders begin to loosen. He saw a sign for a small gas station in a town called Divine. He needed fuel not just for the truck, but for himself. He needed a moment to stand on solid ground before facing the empty house. He pulled into the station, a dusty place with a single pump and a sleeping dog on the porch. He filled the tank, the smell of gasoline mixing with the scent of dry grass. A man in overalls walked out, wiping his hands on a rag. He squinted at George, then his eyes widened. Well, I'll be. George Strait. George smiled a genuine, tired smile. How you doing, Earl? He didn't know the man's name was Earl, but men like this were always named Earl, or Roy, or Buck. The man beamed. I'm doing just fine, George, just fine. My wife, she loves your music. We played I Cross My Heart at our wedding back in '93. George nodded, touching the brim of his hat. That's a good song. I appreciate that. The man hesitated, then asked quietly, How you holding up, George? We heard about Miss Norma. We were real sorry to hear that. She was a good lady. George felt a lump form in his throat. It was different out here. In the city, they asked about the brand. Here, they asked about the woman. Thank you, he said, his voice thick. She was the best. I'm taking it one day at a time. You do that, the man said. You take all the time you need. The music can wait, the heart can't. George paid for the gas and bought a bottle of water. As he walked back to the truck, the man called out, Hey, George, don't let them city folks wear you down. You belong out here. George waved and climbed back into the cab. The interaction was brief, but it was a balm for his soul. It reminded him of who he was and who he was fighting for. He looked at the passenger seat. The phone was still there, silent and waiting. He was ready to go home. The sun was bleeding into the horizon when George finally turned onto the gravel road that led to his ranch. The tires crunched over the stones, a familiar sound that usually signaled the end of a long tour or a hard day. But today, the silence of the property felt different. Usually Norma would have the porch light on. Usually he would smell dinner cooking as soon as he opened the door. Today, the house was dark, a silhouette against the purple sky. He parked the truck and sat there for a moment, listening to the engine tick as it cooled. He picked up the phone and the bottle of water. He walked up the steps to the porch, his boots heavy on the wood. The rocking chairs were there, facing the horizon. He sat in his usual chair, the wood groaning in protest. He placed the phone on the small table between the two chairs. He didn't go inside. He couldn't face the empty kitchen yet. He needed the sky. He waited until the sun had completely disappeared, until the first stars began to poke through the twilight. The crickets began their nightly chorus. It was the time of day Norma loved the most. She used to say that twilight was the time when heaven and earth were closest to touching. George took a deep breath. His hands were shaking again. He put on his reading glasses and picked up the phone. He unlocked it. The passcode was their anniversary. He navigated to the file. He didn't look at the metadata this time. He just looked at the play button. He pressed it. The screen was small, but in the darkness of the porch, it was the only light in the universe. Hey, honey. Norma's voice filled the silence, not amplified by speakers, but tinny and intimate coming from the small device. It sounded like she was right there, whispering in his ear. George leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes locked on the screen. If you're seeing this, I guess I'm already gone, she said. She adjusted the pillow behind her head. She looked tired, but her eyes were dancing. I know you, George. I know you're probably sitting on the porch right now, trying to be strong, trying to be the cowboy that doesn't cry. We'll stop it. You cry if you want to. You've earned it. George let out a sob, a ragged sound that was torn from his chest. Tears spilled over his cheeks, hot and fast. "I wanted to leave you this because I know how much you worry," she continued. "You worry about the ranch. You worry about the kids. You worry about me. But George, I'm okay. I'm not scared. I've had the best life a woman could ask for. I got to love George Strait. Can you believe that? Me, a girl from Pearsall." She laughed, a weak, wheezing sound that broke George's heart into 1,000 pieces. "I want you to keep singing, George," she said, her face becoming serious. "Don't you dare stop. The music is where I'll be. Every time you play a chord, every time you sing a ballad, I'll be right there in the rhythm. But this video, this is just for us. I don't want the world to see me sick. I want them to remember the girl in the red dress." "You remember that dress?" "I remember," George whispered to the screen. "I remember, baby." "And George," she said, leaning closer to the camera, her voice dropping to a whisper, "don't let the business change you. Stay here. Stay on the porch. Find God in the sunset. That's where the truth is. I love you more than all the stars in the Texas sky. I'll save a dance for you. Bye, my love." The video ended. The screen went black, reflecting George's tear-streaked face. He sat there for a long time, holding the phone to his chest, rocking back and forth. The pain was excruciating, a physical ache that radiated through his bones. But beneath the pain, there was peace. She had absolved him. She had given him permission to grieve and permission to live. She had reminded him of what was real. He wiped his face with his sleeve. He looked up at the sky. "I promise, Norma," he whispered. "I promise." He stood up, feeling lighter than he had in months. He was about to go inside to finally pour himself a drink and sleep, when the silence of the night was shattered. His own phone, the one in his pocket, began to ring relentlessly. It wasn't a normal ringtone, it was the specific ringtone he had assigned to his lawyer, Frank. George ignored it. He didn't want to talk to lawyers, but it rang again, and then again. George sighed and pulled the phone out. "Hello, Frank. It's late." "George, you need to turn on the TV." Frank's voice was urgent, panicked. "Or look at Twitter, or anything." "I don't do Twitter, Frank. You know that." "What's going on?" "It's Vortex Media," Frank said. "A video just leaked. It's trending #1 worldwide, George. It's bad." George frowned. "What video?" "I deleted it. I watched myself delete it." "Not Norma's video," Frank said. "A video of you, inside their office. It's edited, George. It looks like you're attacking Tyler Vance. It looks like you're losing your mind. The headlines are already running. Country legend snaps. Is George Strait unstable? They are saying you threatened them. They are spinning this that you were trying to hide something incriminating on Norma's phone." George felt the blood drain from his face. The peace he had found moments ago evaporated. The snakes hadn't just bitten him, they had coiled around his neck. "They are saying what?" George asked, his voice low and dangerous. "They are implying you destroyed evidence," Frank said. "Tyler Vance just released a statement saying they are deeply concerned for Mr. Strait's mental well-being during this difficult time, and that they tried to preserve the family legacy, but were met with hostility." "George, they are painting you as a senile aggressor to cover their own tracks. We need to issue a statement. We need to deny it." George looked at the dark house. He looked at the phone in his other hand, the one holding Norma's final message of love and privacy. "No statement," George said. "George, you have to," Frank pleaded. "This could ruin your reputation. The sponsors, the tour dates, everything is at risk. We have to fight this in the court of public opinion." "I said no statement," George repeated firmly. "I'm not getting in the mud with pigs, Frank. You get dirty, and the pigs like it." "But what are we going to do?" Frank asked, desperate. George looked out at the darkness of the ranch. He thought about what Earl at the gas station had said. "You belong out here." He thought about Norma's voice saying, "Don't let the business change you." "We do nothing tonight," George said. "Let them talk, let them spin." "But George..." "Frank, I'm hanging up. I have a promise to keep." George ended the call. He turned his phone off completely. He stood alone on the porch, surrounded by the night. They wanted a fight. They wanted a media circus. They wanted the angry cowboy to lash out so they could monetize the conflict. But George Strait wasn't going to play their game. He had something more powerful than a press release. He had the truth, and he had the phone. He walked into the house, the screen door slamming behind him. He went to the kitchen and poured a glass of whiskey. He sat at the table where he and Norma had eaten thousands of meals. He placed her phone in the center of the table. He knew this wasn't over. Tyler Vance had declared war, but Tyler Vance had made a critical error. He had mistaken silence for weakness. He had mistaken grief for frailty. George took a sip of the whiskey. The burn was familiar and grounding. He looked at the empty chair opposite him. "They want to show Norma," he said to the empty room. He set the glass down. The sound echoed like a gavel. "I guess I'll have to give them one, but it won't be the show they're expecting." George stood up and walked to the hallway closet. He reached past the coats and pulled out an old guitar case. It wasn't his stage guitar. It was an old Martin D28, scratched and worn, the one he wrote his first songs on. He carried it back to the kitchen. If they wanted to talk about legacy, he would show them what a legacy actually looked like. He wouldn't use a press conference. He wouldn't use a lawyer. He would use the only weapon that had never failed him. He opened the case, and the smell of old wood and steel strings filled the room. He strummed a G chord. It rang out true and clear, cutting through the lies and the noise of the world outside. Tomorrow he would go back to Austin, but not to the office, and not alone. The morning sun did not bring light to the Strait ranch. It brought a siege. The sound of rotor blades chopped through the humid air as news helicopters hovered just outside the property line like giant mechanical mosquitoes. At the main gate, a swarm of satellite trucks and paparazzi were camped out, their lenses trained on the long driveway, hungry for a glimpse of the unstable legend. The narrative had taken hold overnight. The edited clip of George slamming the check onto the table had been viewed 40 million times. The internet, in its infinite capacity for cruelty and lack of context, had decided that George Strait was a bitter, out-of-touch old man who had bullied a young visionary. The headlines were vicious. "The King of Country loses his crown," and "Violent outburst at tech agency raises questions about Strait's competency." Inside the house, the phone lines were unplugged. Frank, the lawyer, had driven out personally, looking pale and shaken. He sat at the kitchen table, wringing his hands. "George, we have to issue a counter-statement. We have to sue for defamation. Tyler Vance is going on Good Morning America in an hour to talk about toxic masculinity in the music industry. He's going to bury you." George stood by the window watching the helicopters. He was dressed not in a suit, but in his starch-stiff Wrangler jeans, a pearl snap shirt, and his best boots. He held his black hat in his hands. He looked calm, almost dangerously so. "Let him talk, Frank. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is putting on its boots." "But the truth isn't putting on its boots, George. The truth is being strangled," Frank shouted, losing his composure. "You destroyed the hard drive. We have no proof of what really happened in that room. It's your word against a time-stamped video." George put his hat on. He adjusted the brim, shadowing his eyes. "I didn't say I was going to court, Frank. I said I was going to work." George walked out the back door, bypassing the main driveway where the wolves were waiting. He climbed into his truck and drove across the pasture, cutting through the fence line onto a service road that only the locals knew. He wasn't heading to a TV studio. He wasn't heading to a lawyer's office. He was heading to the Broken Spoke. The Broken Spoke was a honky-tonk on South Lamar that had withstood the gentrification of Austin like a stubborn old mule. It smelled of chicken-fried steak, stale beer, and sawdust. It was a place where tech billionaires were not welcome unless they knew how to two-step. George had made a call to the owner, James, an old friend. By noon, a handwritten sign was taped to the front door. "Tonight, the Ace in the Hole Band. No cover, no press. First come, first served." Word spread not through algorithms but through the grapevine. By 4 p.m. the line wrapped around the block. Real fans, people in boots and hats, people with calloused hands, people who knew the difference between a brand and a man. When the media vans realized what was happening, they descended on the venue, but the bouncers, big corn-fed boys who had grown up listening to Amarillo by morning, blocked the doors. No cameras, no reporters, just people. Inside, the atmosphere was electric. The low ceilings and neon lights created a cathedral of country music. When George walked onto the small carpeted stage, the room didn't just cheer, it roared. It was a roar of defense, of loyalty. George didn't smile. He adjusted the microphone stand. He picked up his guitar. Behind him, His band fell into formation, ready for war. "I hear there's some talk about me today," George said, his voice steady, cutting through the noise. The crowd went silent instantly. "I hear some folks think I've lost my mind. Maybe I have. Losing the woman you love will do that to a man." He paused, looking at the faces in the front row. "There's a man in a glass tower downtown who thinks he owns my memories. He thinks because he has a computer, he has a soul. Yesterday I paid $10 million to keep a secret that belonged to my wife." A gasp rippled through the crowd. $10 million. "They say I was angry," George continued, strumming a G chord, the sound rich and mournful. "You're damn right I was angry, because some things aren't for sale. Your grief isn't for sale, your love isn't for sale, and the last words of a dying woman sure as hell aren't content for a social media campaign." In the VIP section of the Broken Spoke, hidden in the shadows, sat a young man. It was the intern from Vortex Media, the one who had recorded the video. He had snuck in, terrified, his conscience eating him alive since the meeting. He had seen Tyler Vance laughing that morning, bragging about how he had neutralized the old dinosaur. The intern had the full video on his phone, the unedited version, the version where George reads the note, the version where Tyler admits he doesn't care about Norma's wishes. On stage, George began to sing. He didn't sing a hit. He sang a song he had written the night before, sitting at his kitchen table with Norma's phone. It was raw. It was simple. It was called "Don't Post This." She said, "Keep it for the porch light. Keep it for the stars. Don't let 'em trade our memories for fancy electric cars. They want to sell the teardrops. They want to sell the pain. But baby, I'd give everything just to whisper your name." As George sang, the intern in the corner felt tears streaming down his face. He looked at his phone. He looked at the man on stage who was pouring his heart out, not to clear his name, but to honor his wife. The intern realized he was part of the machine that was trying to crush this authenticity. He opened his Twitter app. He created an anonymous account. He attached the full 4-minute video file of the meeting. He typed a simple caption, "The truth about George Strait. Watch until the end." He hit send. While George was in the bridge of the song, the phone in everyone's pocket began to buzz. It started as a ripple, people checking notifications, then gasps, then people showing their screens to their neighbors. The energy in the room shifted from somber to furious. They were watching the video. They were seeing Tyler Vance sneer at the note. They were hearing George defend Norma's honor. They were seeing the check. By the time George finished the song, the room wasn't cheering for a singer. They were cheering for a hero. The video was spreading faster than the lie had. It was being retweeted by other country stars, by politicians, by regular people who were sick of being treated like data points. George finished the song and looked up, confused by the sudden change in the crowd's energy. A woman in the front row held up her phone. "We saw it, George! We saw the truth! It's out!" George squinted against the stage lights. He didn't know what was out. He just knew that the heaviness in the room had lifted. Meanwhile, in the glass tower, Tyler Vance was in the middle of a champagne toast with his board of directors when his phone began to explode. Notifications, cancellations, the stock price of Vortex Media beginning to plummet in after-hours trading. He opened the link. He saw the full video. He saw his own face, high definition and arrogant, dismissing the dying wish of a beloved woman. He looked up at his board members, who were checking their own phones, their expressions turning from celebration to disgust. The phone on the conference table rang. It was the biggest client the agency had. Tyler reached for it, but his hand was shaking so badly he knocked his champagne glass over. The glass shattered. The liquid spilled over the table, ruining the expensive finish. It was over. The court of public opinion had adjourned, and the verdict was total ruin. Back at the Broken Spoke, the show went on for 3 hours. George played every request. He played Amarillo by morning. He played The Chair. He played until his fingers bled and his voice was raspy. He didn't need a press release, he had the music. When the show finally ended, George walked out the back door into the cool night air. The paparazzi were gone. They had rushed to the Vortex Media headquarters to catch Tyler Vance doing the walk of shame. The alleyway was quiet. George climbed into his truck. He was exhausted, bone-deep tired, but his spirit was light. He drove back to the ranch under a canopy of stars that seemed brighter than usual. He pulled up to the house. It was past midnight. The helicopters were gone. The silence had returned. He walked up the steps to the porch and sat in the rocking chair. He reached into his pocket and pulled out Norma's phone. He didn't turn it on. He didn't need to watch the video again tonight. He knew what she had said. He knew she was proud. He looked out at the dark pasture. "Well, Norma," he whispered, "we gave them a hell of a show, didn't we?" A gentle breeze rustled the mesquite trees, sounding like a soft, approving sigh. George closed his eyes, rocking slowly back and forth. The world could keep its viral moments, its trending topics, and its digital noise. He had his porch. He had his honor. And in the quiet sanctuary of his heart, he had her. And that was the only engagement that mattered.